Hey everyone, if you've ever stood in the aisle trying to decide whether a stick welder is worth the shelf space and the money, you know the feeling. You don't want to waste cash on a tool that sits idle or, worse, underperforms when you finally need it. I get it. You're looking for something that will actually help you finish that backyard project or the occasional metal repair without turning the whole thing into a headache. The Miller Electric Stick Welder 907-7701 is the model I've been digging into because it's pitched as its starter-friendly, made-in-USA machine, and I wanted to see if those claims hold up for real-world use. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about who this welder is really for. If you're a hobbyist who occasionally bolts together a metal gate, patches a rusted pipe, or does a bit of chassis work in the garage, the Miller 907-7701 fits right into that niche. It's a compact, single-phase stick welder that runs on standard 120-volt household outlets, which means you don't have to hunt for a 240-volt circuit in the basement. That alone is a huge convenience factor for anyone who doesn't have a dedicated workshop space. On the other side of the line, if you're a professional fabricator who needs to run high-amperage welds all day, or if you're planning to take on thick-section structural steel, this unit probably isn't the right choice. It's designed for lighter gauge work. Think inch plate or thinner, so you'll quickly hit the limits if you try to push it beyond its intended range. Now, let's walk through a typical day with this welder. I set it up in a small garage, plugged it into a standard GFCI outlet, and turned the knob to select the amperage. The controls are straightforward: a single dial for current, a selector for polarity, and a digital display that tells you the exact amp setting. What I appreciated most is the clear feedback while it's running. You can see at a glance if the welder is staying in the range you selected or if it's spiking up due to an inconsistent stick. That kind of instant readout can save you a lot of guesswork, especially when you're working with different electrode sizes. One practical strength that becomes obvious fast is the way the machine handles the arc start phase. Many entry-level stick welders struggle to get a stable arc on the first strike, which often leads to a messy, spattered start. With the Miller, the arc is surprisingly consistent on the first touch. I tested it with a standard E6013 2mm stick on mild steel, and the initial strike was clean, with minimal spatter. That consistency translates into smoother welds and less post-weld cleanup, which matters when you're trying to finish a job quickly and don't want to spend an hour sanding away spatter. Another point worth noting is the cooling system. The machine uses an internal fan that kicks in as the amperage rises. In a long welding session, say, a couple of hours of continuous welding on a thin sheet, the welder managed its temperature fairly well. The fan noise is audible but not distracting, and the unit never went into a thermal shutoff mode during my tests. This is a practical advantage for anyone who might be welding a series of small parts back-to-back, because you won't have to pause every few minutes to let the welder cool down. When it comes to portability, this Miller packs into a sturdy metal case that weighs around 30 pounds. It's light enough to carry up to the job site in a pickup truck, yet heavy enough to feel solid on the workbench. The case includes a built-in handle and a small compartment for a few sticks and a welding helmet. I found that convenience useful when I was moving from the garage to the driveway to repair an outdoor metal bike rack. The welder survived the short trip without any dents, and the case's snap-tight latch kept the internal components safe from dust. That said, the machine isn't without its trade-offs. One limitation I ran into is the lack of a built-in voltage selector. Because it's a single-phase 120-volt unit, the maximum output caps out at about 140 amperes. For most hobby projects that's plenty, but if you try to weld an inch-thick pipe, you'll likely notice the arc stalling or the machine struggling to maintain the heat. In those scenarios, you'd need to step up to a dual-phase welder or switch to a different welding process entirely. Another practical weakness is the absence of a built-in ground clamp. You'll have to purchase a separate clamp, which most shops already have, but for a first-time buyer who's assembling a brand new welding kit, that's an extra piece of hardware to source. The good news is that the clamp is inexpensive and compatible with most standard welding leads, but the extra step can feel like an unexpected hurdle when you're eager to get started. Battery life isn't a concern here because the machine runs on mains power, but